There's something almost startling about remembering those early mornings in a 1970s British school, when the day began not with chatter or choice, but with quiet order. You can almost picture it now. Uniforms neatly straightened at home, shoes polished until they reflected the hallway lights, and children forming tidy lines before the first bell even sounded. Back then, the rules weren't simply guidelines, they shaped the rhythm of every day. Silence wasn't requested, it was expected. And there was a shared understanding that you followed the system because that's just how things were. To modern eyes, it feels almost unbelievable. Today's schools focus on open conversation, comfort, and individual expression. But in those days, uniformity meant pride. And discipline was simply part of growing up. This opening glimpse takes us back to an era where structure defined childhood, a memory that leads us naturally into why schools felt so different then. To understand why 1970s school rules felt so firm, we have to step back into the mindset of the time. Although Britain was moving into a new era of color television, pop culture, and growing modernity, many communities still lived with a post-war sense of order. Parents who had grown up in the 1940s and 50s valued discipline deeply, believing that respect, structure, and routine were the foundations of a good life. Schools simply mirrored those expectations. Technology was limited, which meant lessons relied heavily on concentration, handwriting, and listening skills that demanded quiet rooms and attentive pupils. Without digital distractions, the focus was on neat work, good manners, and following instructions precisely. Teachers were seen as unquestionable figures of authority, shaped by older traditions that carried into their classrooms. Even as society outside the school gates began shifting towards freedom and self-expression, many school practices stayed rooted in earlier decades. This contrast between a changing Britain and old-fashioned classrooms helps explain why rules felt so unwavering, setting the stage for the strict routines pupils remember so clearly, routines that defined everyday life once you stepped inside. Step inside a 1970s classroom, and one of the first things you'd notice is the quiet, a kind of disciplined stillness that feels almost unimaginable today. The moment you crossed the threshold, conversation stopped. You took your place at a wooden desk, the surface often etched with years of careful writing, and waited for instructions without a sound. Even the faint scrape of a chair felt loud in a room where silence was the rule, not the exception. Teachers placed enormous importance on neat handwriting, and every loop, curve, and line mattered. Exercise books were checked with precision, and pupils were expected to keep pages tidy, margins straight, and work presented with pride. Perfect posture was another standard. Shoulders back, feet flat, eyes forward. It wasn't about appearance. It was about focus and respect. Obedience was woven into the culture. If a teacher asked for quiet, it arrived instantly. If they wanted attention, every head turned in unison. The smell of chalk dust, the echo of footsteps in long corridors, and the rhythmic clatter of board rubbers created a routine as familiar as breathing. By today's flexible, student-centered standards, these expectations seem astonishing, yet they form the backbone of daily classroom life. If there's one thing that instantly sets 1970s school life apart from today, it's the uniform, not just the clothing itself, but the precision expected. Every morning began with a quiet inspection at home, shoes polished until they shone, laces tucked neatly, and socks pulled up to exactly the right height. Some schools even specified the shade of gray or the pattern of stripes, and parents took great care to ensure everything matched perfectly. Creases were ironed sharply into trousers and skirts, and names were carefully stitched into collars so nothing ever went astray. Hair had its own set of rules. It needed to be tidy, practical, and never distracting. For many pupils, this meant regular trims and a very simple style. Seasonal rules added another layer: wool jumpers in winter, lighter blazers in spring, and sometimes even different colored ties depending on the term. Compare that with today, where dress codes often allow more comfort, expression, and relaxed presentation. Modern pupils might choose softer shoes, varied hairstyles, or more flexible layers. But in the 1970s, uniformity was the goal. Those detailed rules were more than just clothing expectations. They set the tone for the discipline that followed throughout the day. For many of us, the playground felt like freedom. But looking back, it was freedom within firm boundaries. In the 1970s, even playtime carried its own set of clear, unquestioned rules. The playground was divided into designated zones, and pupils were expected to stay in their assigned areas. Younger children played on one side, older ones on another, and there was rarely any mixing. It kept things orderly, but it also meant you could hear friends laughing just a few meters away while knowing you couldn't join them until you moved up a year. Games were more structured too. Skipping ropes marked out patterns on the ground, chalk lines were drawn for hopscotch, and each activity had its own unspoken etiquette. A teacher standing at the edge of the playground kept watch, ensuring everyone followed the routines. No wandering, no running beyond certain points, and certainly no inventing wild new games without a quiet nod of approval. The sounds of those break times remain vivid: the rhythmic slap of skipping ropes, the thud of a well-worn ball, the echo of laughter bouncing between brick walls. Compared to today's open, creative playground environments, the 1970s version feels almost astonishing in its structure, yet it was a cherished part of daily school life. Looking back now, it's easy to see those rules as rigid, even overwhelming, yet they shaped something far deeper in our childhoods. Beneath the structure was a quiet sense of belonging, everyone following the same routines, facing the same expectations, and learning the same lessons about patience, respect, and responsibility. The predictability of each school day created a rhythm that felt reassuring, even if we didn't recognize it at the time. Those shared experiences formed friendships that were built on more than just sitting next to someone in class. We stood in the same morning lines. These moments became the glue of our early lives, creating bonds that often lasted well beyond school. For many, the discipline helped build resilience. You learned to adapt, to focus, and to find small pockets of joy within routine. And while today's children grow up with more flexibility and freedom, there's a warmth in remembering how our generation moved through school together, united by rules that felt unshakable, yet somehow comforting. These memories remind us just how unique that era truly was, and why it still stays with us. If the rules of 1970s school life suddenly returned to modern Britain, they would feel almost unimaginable. Today's classrooms are built around well-being, creativity, and individual expression, with pupils encouraged to share ideas, question confidently, and learn in ways that suit them. The focus has shifted from strict routine to personal growth, reflecting a society that values flexibility and emotional understanding far more than before. Yet there's a soft sentiment in remembering those old expectations. They shaped a generation that learnt resilience, respect, and togetherness through shared experience. The rules may be gone, and rightly so, but the memories remain a quiet reminder of the era that helped form who we became. If this trip back to 1970s school life brought back a few memories, don't leave just yet. The video on your screen takes the story even further with moments you won't believe. Do subscribe, subscribe, subscribe.